The streets of Charleston whispered with the echoes of history, cobblestone paths lined with ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. The salty breeze from the harbor carried both charm and a weight of stories untold. For Amara Johnson, the city was a blend of beauty and burden. As a young black artist from a small town in Georgia, she had always dreamed of her work being displayed in one of Charleston's prestigious galleries. Art was her language, her refuge, a canvas where colors spoke louder than words. Amara's paintings were bold, vibrant expressions of her heritage and personal journey. Her latest collection, Roots and Resilience, captured the complexities of Black identity in America, portraits layered with textures of struggle, hope, and triumph. When she received an invitation to submit her work to the Whitmore Gallery, a renowned space known for showcasing contemporary artists, her heart swelled with anticipation. This was her chance to be seen, to have her story heard through strokes of color and shadow. Dressed in a simple navy dress, her natural curls framed her face with a quiet confidence. She carried her portfolio tucked under her arm as she approached the grand entrance of the gallery, its white pillars gleaming under the afternoon sun. The glass doors reflected her image back at her, a young woman determined to leave her mark. Inside, the gallery buzzed with hushed conversations and the soft click of heels against polished floors. Abstract sculptures and minimalist paintings adorned the walls, but none carried the depth Amara felt in her own work. She approached the front desk where a tall man in a tailored suit stood, his sharp features marked by a subtle smirk. "Good afternoon," Amara began, her voice steady. "I'm here to submit my portfolio for the upcoming exhibit." The man barely glanced at her, his eyes sweeping over her with thinly veiled disdain. "Are you sure you have the right gallery?" he replied curtly. His name tag read Graham Larkin, senior curator. Amara's chest tightened, but she kept her composure. "Yes, this is the Whitmore Gallery. I received an invitation." She handed him the neatly sealed envelope, her name printed clearly on the label. Graham took the envelope reluctantly, flipping it between his fingers like it was something fragile, or perhaps unworthy. His gaze shifted from her face to her clothes, then back to her dark skin, his expression cool and dismissive. "We have very high standards," he said sharply. "Submissions are competitive. We are looking for refined work that aligns with our gallery's aesthetic." The implication hung in the air, thick and cutting. Amara's jaw clenched, but she refused to shrink. "My work speaks for itself," she replied firmly. Graham gave a tight, patronizing smile. "We'll see." He tossed the envelope onto a pile without a second glance. As Amara turned to leave, her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the simmering injustice she had faced more times than she could count. But she did not know that someone had been watching, someone whose quiet eyes had seen everything. Amara stepped out of the Whitmore Gallery into the heavy Charleston heat, her heartbeat drumming in her ears louder than the traffic humming along King Street. The salty breeze that once felt refreshing now stung, mingling with the burn of humiliation. She had faced dismissive attitudes before, but something about Graham Larkin's sneer settled like a weight in her chest. It was not just the rejection. It was the way he had looked at her, as if her presence was an intrusion, her art an inconvenience. But Amara was not someone who folded easily. Art had taught her resilience. Every stroke of her brush was a rebellion against those who doubted her, every canvas a testament to her strength. Still, the sting of that moment gnawed at her as she walked away, portfolio clutched tightly in her hands. Inside the gallery, Lena Whitmore watched from the shadow of a tall sculpture near the front desk. She was the daughter of the gallery's founder, though most people did not realize it. Lena had chosen to work quietly as an assistant, preferring the solace of art over the sharp edges of her family's privilege. Her sharp gray eyes had seen Graham's dismissive treatment of Amara, and it unsettled her. Lena had always believed that art was supposed to challenge, to inspire, to reflect the world's truths, not just to decorate sterile white walls for wealthy patrons. But the gallery, under Graham's influence, had grown comfortable with curated sameness, celebrating artists who fit a certain mold, who painted safe subjects in safe colors. Later that evening, after the gallery had emptied and the hum of voices faded, Lena found herself alone at the submission desk. Amara's envelope still sat untouched, slightly crumpled under the weight of other portfolios. Curiosity, and something else Lena could not quite name, urged her to pick it up. She hesitated, her fingers brushing over Amara's name before she carefully opened it. Inside were photographs of Amara's paintings, vivid and raw. One piece showed the silhouette of a black woman with roots growing from her feet, intertwining with the earth beneath her, a symbol of connection and unshakable strength. Another depicted hands reaching upward, painted in rich, bold colors, fingers stretching beyond invisible barriers. The artwork was extraordinary. It was fearless. Lena's chest tightened with a mix of admiration and guilt. She thought about how Graham had dismissed Amara without even seeing her work. This was not just about art. It was about something deeper, an unspoken rule that voices like Amara's were not meant to be heard in spaces like this. The next morning, Amara received an impersonal email from the Whitmore Gallery. "Thank you for your submission. Unfortunately, we have decided not to include your work in our upcoming exhibit. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." No feedback, no explanation, just a polite rejection wrapped in cold indifference. Amara stared at the screen, her fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard. For a moment, she considered replying, demanding an explanation, but what would it change? She had learned long ago that confronting people like Graham rarely led to accountability. They hid behind polite words and closed doors, their biases masked as professional judgment. But this time felt different. Maybe it was the look on Graham's face, or maybe it was because she was tired of swallowing her pride, of pretending these slights were small. So, instead of replying to the email, Amara posted her experience on social media. She shared not just the rejection but the way she had been treated, her words raw and unfiltered. "I walked into the Whitmore Gallery full of hope, carrying my art, my story. I left feeling invisible, dismissed not because of my work, but because of who I am. This is what discrimination looks like in the art world. It wears a suit, speaks with polite words, and hides behind standards. But I refuse to be invisible." She attached photos of her paintings, letting the world see what Graham had refused to. Within hours, her post began to gain traction. Comments poured in, some from fellow Black artists who shared similar experiences, others from people who were outraged by the blatant discrimination. The post was shared widely, catching the attention of local art enthusiasts, activists, and even a few journalists. Back at the gallery, Graham was furious. "This is defamation," he snapped, pacing his office. "She is trying to damage the gallery's reputation." Lena sat quietly in the corner, her mind racing. She knew the truth. She had seen it unfold. But speaking up would mean going against Graham, against the gallery, against her own family's legacy. And yet, as she glanced at her phone, rereading Amara's post, Lena felt something shift inside her. A realization that silence was its own form of complicity. She could not ignore it. Not this time. The Whitmore Gallery hummed with an uneasy tension in the days following Amara's post. The usual crowd of art enthusiasts still filtered through its pristine halls, but whispers followed Graham Larkin wherever he went. His confidence had been rattled, though he masked it with forced smiles and curt commands to the staff. Lena watched it all unfold with a growing knot in her stomach. She had always known the gallery operated with an undercurrent of exclusion, wrapped in the polite veneer of professional standards. But seeing it called out so publicly made the injustice undeniable. The post had done more than expose Graham. It had forced the art community to confront a truth it had long ignored. Outside the gallery's walls, Amara's words continued to ripple through social media. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, it was the subject of heated discussions in online forums, podcasts, and even university classrooms. Amara's boldness resonated with many who had been dismissed or silenced in spaces that claimed to be inclusive. But the attention came with a cost. Amara began receiving messages, not just of support, but also of anger. Some accused her of playing the race card. Others claimed she was trying to ruin a respected institution. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. She sat in her small studio apartment, scrolling through the barrage of comments. The sunlight that spilled through the cracked blinds painted patterns on the floor, but Amara felt none of its warmth. She had expected resistance, but the cruelty in some of the messages chipped at her resolve. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "Hello, Amara. My name is Lena Whitmore. I work at the gallery. I saw what happened, and I need to speak with you. Please." Amara stared at the message. The name was familiar, tied to the gallery's legacy. She hesitated. Was this a trap? Another dismissal wrapped in politeness? But something about the message felt different. She replied with cautious curiosity, "What do you want to talk about?" They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the gallery, a neutral space. Amara arrived first, choosing a seat near the window. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her face marked by exhaustion and defiance. Lena arrived shortly after, dressed in jeans and a loose sweater, her gallery ID tucked out of sight. She approached Amara with a tentative smile, her gray eyes serious. "Thank you for meeting me," Lena said, sliding into the seat across from her. Amara nodded, but kept her guard up. "You said you wanted to talk. So talk." Lena took a deep breath. "I saw what happened that day. The way Graham treated you. It was wrong. And it is not just you. This gallery has built walls around itself, pretending it is about standards. But those walls are designed to keep people like you out. I am ashamed to say I stayed silent then, but I am not going to anymore." Amara's expression softened slightly, but skepticism lingered. "Why now? Because the gallery's reputation is on the line?" "No," Lena replied quietly, "because it is the right thing to do." She reached into her bag and pulled out Amara's portfolio, the very one Graham had dismissed without a glance. "I opened it after you left. Your work is brilliant. It deserves to be seen." Amara's heart tightened. She wanted to believe Lena, but years of experience had taught her that promises often led to disappointment. "So what do you want from me?" Amara asked. "Nothing," Lena replied. "But I think you deserve to have your voice heard, not just online. The gallery is hosting an event next week, a showcase for emerging artists. I want your work there." Amara let out a bitter laugh. "You think Graham will allow that?" "He won't," Lena admitted. "But I am not asking for his permission." Amara studied Lena's face, searching for cracks, for signs of pity or guilt disguised as charity. But all she saw was determination. "If I do this," Amara said slowly, "it is on my terms. No apologies. No explanations." Lena nodded. "On your terms." The following days were a whirlwind. Lena worked quietly, navigating around Graham's authority. She enlisted the help of a few trusted colleagues, people who had also grown weary of the gallery's unspoken rules but had never found the courage to push back. They arranged for Amara's paintings to be delivered and hung in a section of the gallery reserved for featured artists. The night of the showcase arrived. The Whitmore Gallery gleamed under soft lights, filled with Charleston's elite. Art critics, collectors, and socialites mingling with champagne glasses in hand. Graham Larkin moved through the crowd with his usual arrogance, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the polished surface. Amara stood near the entrance, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the electric pulse of defiance. She wore a simple black dress, her natural curls framing her face with quiet strength. Lena stood beside her, a silent anchor. When Graham finally noticed Amara's paintings displayed prominently in the center hall, his face darkened. "What is this?" he snapped, storming over to Lena. "It is art," Lena replied evenly, "and it belongs here." Graham's jaw clenched. "Take it down. Now." But by then, people had already gathered around Amara's work, drawn in by its raw beauty. Conversations buzzed with admiration. A local reporter even approached Amara, notebook in hand. "This is the artist behind these pieces," Lena announced loudly, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Amara Johnson." The crowd turned, eyes filled with curiosity and respect. Amara met Graham's glare with a steady gaze. "You wanted to keep me invisible," she said quietly, "but here I am." Graham's power had always relied on silence, on people being too afraid to speak. But silence had been broken, and there was no going back. The room seemed to shift after Amara's quiet declaration. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses stilled halfway to lips, and all eyes settled on the confrontation unfolding in the heart of the Whitmore Gallery. The tension hung in the air like a fragile thread, ready to snap. Graham Larkin's face flushed a deep red, his polished composure unraveling. His authority had never been questioned so publicly, especially not within the gallery's pristine walls. He took a sharp step toward Lena, his voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for her. "Do you realize what you've done?" he hissed. "You've embarrassed this institution. You'll regret this." Lena stood her ground, her gray eyes unflinching. "The only embarrassment here is you, Graham," she replied, her voice clear and firm. This gallery was meant to be a place for art to thrive, for voices to be heard, not just the ones you approve of. The crowd, drawn by the confrontation, grew larger. Whispers swirled like currents around them. Some people averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the rawness of the moment, but others leaned in, their curiosity piqued. Among them were local journalists who had attended the event expecting to cover an art showcase, not a reckoning. Amara could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, but she refused to shrink under it. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Lena. "I was never asking for your approval, Graham," Amara said, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "I just wanted my work to be seen for what it is, not through the filter of your biases." A sharp silence followed. Then, a voice from the crowd broke through. "She's right." The words came from Carlos Mendez, a respected art critic known for his blunt honesty. He stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning Amara's paintings. "This work is powerful. It belongs here more than half of what's on these walls." His words acted like a spark, igniting murmurs of agreement throughout the crowd. Other voices joined in, artists, patrons, even a few gallery staff members who had long felt stifled by Graham's rigid control. Graham tried to regain control, his voice rising above the crowd. "This is my gallery, and I decide what belongs here." But Lena's next words cut through the noise like a blade. "It's not your gallery, Graham." A hush fell over the room. Lena turned to face the crowd, her voice strong and unwavering. "This gallery was founded by my family. My name is Lena Whitmore." Gasps rippled through the audience. Even Amara's eyes widened slightly. Lena had never used her family name publicly, never wielded it as a shield or a sword. But tonight, it was both. "My family's vision for this gallery was to celebrate art in all its forms, from all voices," Lena continued. "Somewhere along the way, that vision got lost. It's time we found it again." The room erupted in a mix of applause and shocked whispers. Graham stood frozen, his authority crumbling in real time. Lena turned back to Amara, her expression softening slightly. "Your work stays, and you deserve more than just a spot on these walls. You deserve the respect that should have been given to you from the start." Amara felt a swell of emotions, gratitude, relief, but most of all, pride. Not just in Lena's courage, but in her own. She had spoken up, refused to be invisible, and now, here she stood. Her art not just displayed but celebrated. The event took on a new life after that. People flocked to Amara's paintings, not out of curiosity fueled by scandal, but genuine admiration. Conversations sparked around the bold colors, the stories woven into every brushstroke. A local news crew even approached Amara for an interview. Graham, now a shadow of the authority he once wielded, disappeared quietly into the crowd, his influence fading as quickly as it had unraveled. In the days that followed, the gallery experienced a transformation. Lena officially stepped into a leadership role, implementing changes that prioritized diversity and inclusivity. Artists who had once been overlooked were now given space to shine. Amara's career blossomed. Galleries reached out, eager to showcase her work. But it wasn't just the exposure that mattered to her. It was the knowledge that she had fought for her place and won. One afternoon, weeks after the showcase, Amara stood in front of her favorite piece from Roots and Resilience. Lena joined her, both women silent for a moment, simply taking in the art that had started it all. "Thank you," Amara said quietly. Lena shook her head. "No, thank you for standing up. You didn't just change the gallery, you changed me." They stood there, side by side, not as artist and curator, but as two people who had found courage in unexpected places. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that night at the Whitmore Gallery continued to ripple through Charleston's art scene and beyond. What had started as a simple showcase had become a catalyst for deeper conversations about race, representation, and accountability in spaces long dominated by selective narratives. Amara Johnson's name was no longer just attached to her art. It was tied to a movement. Her paintings, once confined to the corners of her small apartment, now graced the walls of galleries across the country. Art critics praised her fearless expression, and her work was featured in magazines that had previously ignored voices like hers. But more than the recognition, it was the connection with people. Young Black artists, marginalized creators, who reached out to her, sharing their own stories of exclusion that mattered most to Amara. She responded to every message she could, offering not just encouragement but solidarity. She knew how it felt to be dismissed, to have your work unseen because of who you were. Now, she wanted to be the voice she once needed. At the Whitmore Gallery, change was no longer just a promise, it was action. Lena Whitmore's leadership transformed the space into what it was meant to be, a platform for diverse voices, challenging the comfort zones of patrons who had grown used to a narrow view of art. She established new programs to support underrepresented artists, curated exhibitions that told stories of resilience, identity, and truth, and dismantled the unspoken barriers that had once kept the gallery's doors selectively closed. Graham Larkin's influence faded into obscurity. His dismissal from the gallery was swift, a quiet footnote compared to the noise he had once commanded. His fall from grace was not marked by public scandal, but by something more profound: the loss of the control he had wielded through silence and exclusion. One crisp autumn afternoon, Amara returned to the gallery, not as a visitor, not as someone seeking approval, but as a featured artist for her solo exhibition titled Visible. The title was deliberate. Standing in the main hall, surrounded by her paintings, Amara felt a quiet peace. The walls that once rejected her now held her work with pride. She moved through the crowd with ease, her confidence rooted not just in the recognition but in the journey that had led her here. Lena found her near a large canvas that depicted a figure standing tall, vibrant colors radiating outward, a symbol of presence, of being unapologetically seen. "It's perfect," Lena said softly, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the gallery lights. Amara smiled. "It's honest." They stood in silence for a moment, the buzz of voices around them fading into the background. "Do you ever think about that day?" Lena asked quietly. Amara nodded. "I do, but not with anger anymore. That day was a door. I just had to be brave enough to walk through it." Lena glanced around at the gallery, now filled with art that told stories of struggle, hope, and triumph from voices that had once been overlooked. "And you held it open for others," Lena replied. Amara looked back at her painting, the colors bold and defiant. "We both did." As the evening drew to a close, Amara stood by the entrance, greeting guests who had been moved by her work. Among them were young artists, some shy, some eager, carrying portfolios filled with dreams and untold stories. One girl, no older than 16, approached Amara, her eyes wide with admiration. "Your art, it made me feel like I matter," she whispered. Amara's heart swelled with emotion. "You do matter," she replied gently. "Never let anyone make you feel invisible." The girl smiled, her grip tightening on the sketchbook she held. As Amara watched her walk away, she felt the weight of her journey settle into something new. Not a burden, but a legacy. She had been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated, but she had never been invisible, and she never would be again. This story reminds us that discrimination often hides behind polite words and established systems. But courage, whether in speaking up, standing with someone, or creating change, has the power to dismantle those systems. Accountability starts when silence ends, and justice thrives when people choose to act, even when it is uncomfortable. Amara and Lena's story shows that standing up for what is right not only changes institutions, it changes lives.